Afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori Gagan, and welcome to today's podcast on MainStreetMediaUtah.org, or the shortened version, which is KMMU.org. Today, I'm honored to be here with Phil Lyman and Tracy Halverson, Dr. Richard Fleming, Jim Gagan, and 107 is going to be joining us here shortly. So we've got some great updates on what's happening with the SCOTUS filing, and Tracy and Phil have some other information on poisoned power here in Utah. So we've got a lot to cover today. Let's go ahead and get started. So Phil, Tracy, where do we stand on the SCOTUS update?
So it looks like Tracy's maybe dropped off for a sec, but we've got the 700-page case that was sent off. They wanted some corrections made. Those corrections have been made. They received that Thursday morning. We expect that to be docketed Monday, and then we'll find out what the schedule is. But it's a question dealing with the right of association and the Torres Lopez case, and so we're just looking really. It should go fast. This first round should go fast with the Supreme Court, and that's where it's at. We'll go from there as soon as we hear from them.
And in all fairness, they'll probably docket it Tuesday, since Monday's a federal holiday.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, and I don't know if they'll talk about it as early as Friday. I guess we'll find out.
No, what will routinely happen is that it will get docketed by the clerk for Gorsuch. Since you're in the 10th Appellate Circuit, Gorsuch is the Supreme Court justice that oversees that circuit, that appellate circuit.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that Tracy has submitted two items. One is the actual case to be heard, and the other is an injunction for immediate relief. The injunction will probably, it'll be the first thing acted upon. The speed with which it's acted upon will be determined by a number of factors, the number of cases that have been submitted, as well as Tracy's follow-up with them. So that's why I'd asked her in the pre-show if she had called. She said that she had called, but there was nobody who responded back. So her job then on Tuesday morning will be to call, and you do have an advantage because you're mountain time, so you're 2 hours behind the East Coast. So if she calls at 8 a.m., that'll be about 10 a.m. for the clerk, depending upon how much is going on. And it's just one of those nice, polite telephone calls where Tracy, she's already had good communication from the clerk, where the clerk saw a couple errors, sent it back. They had a nice exchange, which shows an open communication. Good work by Tracy, and good work by the clerk, quite frankly. And so this is an opportunity then for Tracy in her communication on Tuesday. And I would actually recommend Tuesday afternoon, because nobody wants to be receiving or being inundated by things on Monday morning or Tuesday morning after a weekend. And they're not very big on that on Fridays. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and in this instance, Tuesday afternoon would be the best time for her to communicate, allowing the clerk to get in and deal with stresses of the day, start opening mail, start processing, so the clerk can say, yes, I've seen this, I have it, we'll docket it, and then Tracy can say, thank you, I appreciated that. I just wanted to talk to you because we do have the emergency injunction that we're asking for action on, and that will give the clerk the opportunity to go, oh, okay, I should look at this one in particular now because it's a voting issue, it's an injunction issue, and then that will allow them to communicate that. So hopefully, I don't know if you heard all of that, Tracy, but we were using your name in vain.
She just
simply
back
talking
on.
about you calling on Tuesday afternoon, considering the 2-hour differential between you and the East Coast. So you could communicate with the clerk, Gorsuch's clerk, and say, just following up with you, wanting to make sure you received it. I know it had been received there. You probably are inundated with things. I was just calling because we do have the emergency injunction, and I just was hoping to, make you aware of that as you're going through probably more than enough workload, and the clerk will appreciate that, right?
Right.
So, and that's going to be the first thing that they rule on. What they will do, the clerk will have to take a flow through the case, because if the case isn't a case that they think is important enough to be heard, then they're not going to do much with the injunction. But if they go through it and they go, okay, there's valid law here, she's brought, as you have, the Lopez case from the New York Circuit to them, and made them aware that despite the fact that the Supreme Court has already ruled on this issue of what the political parties may do in their First Amendment rights to determine who they want their candidates to be. And now the state of Utah passed SB 54, which violates that. And it's kind of interesting to watch the outcome of this election, where the man who got the most number of votes then could not run as his party's candidate. And again, if memory is correct, I think Mr. Lyman, you got 77,000+ write-in votes, which may not seem like much, but it tells me that with what the Gagans have done here on this podcast, and the other people that have showed up, is that the people of Utah heard this and responded. Because when you think about 77,000 people having to circle a write-in oval and then write in your name, that's an action. That's a powerful action by the people of Utah. It is a recognition of something having gone amok, and Jim and Lori Gagan have driven this home. Tracy has driven this home. You have driven this home. You've pointed out this one video that I know you're going to be showing.
So
about Cox doing the exact opposite of what he said in this video that's coming up. So I'll back off with that.
Yeah, I hate to interrupt you. So we're at 113,000 right now. Still, some counties still with a lot of votes to bring in, and the votes that are coming in at the end are heavily weighted for us because they're the votes that are the ballots that are being adjudicated. So yeah, it's a huge statement. I looked in historically. There was one write-in candidate that had 139,000, is the highest in the United States history. The biggest one, that's the highest profile, is the one in Alaska, Murkowski. She had 100,000. So if this stays on track, Amanda with the most write-in votes of anybody in U.S. history, which doesn't mean a whole lot if you don't win, but still it is significant. So and to your point, Dr. Fleming, they love to drop those numbers at the beginning and then say, oh, and I'm getting this ha ha ha, Phil only got 70,000 votes. Oh, ha ha ha, Phil only got 80,000 votes. Oh, ha ha. It just goes on and on. It's no matter what you get, it's just total mockery from the left, which I've found that ridicule is the only tool that they really have to fight the facts that we're coming up with on these things. And I'll let Tracy jump into this, but I just love, and I've told people, I said, it's a little bit of a misnomer to say that we're fighting SB 54, because that was a bill in 2014 that's been updated by other bills, by other bills, by other bills. And Tracy's been looking into this SB 207 from 2015. I was just, getting a primer on it before. And these changes are not insignificant. And especially when you go back and you look at their committee hearings and the all that went into that. So I'll let Tracy talk about that if you're ready to.
I have a quick question. Is it important for our viewers, because we do have attorneys on, to know about was it the Jones Supreme Court ruling that Dr. Fleming and Tracy referenced? Is it important to maybe just give a quick update on why that is so important to this case?
Yeah, it's important because it actually is a very similar case. It was two candidates. They didn't think it was fair that they could not get elected and nominated through the convention process. So they demanded that it go to a direct primary every time to pick these judges in New York. It was an election board that picked it. And it went through, and the two lower case or courts said, no, you have to have a direct primary. And they appealed it. The parties appealed it all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, where they overturned those rulings and said, no, you cannot force somebody to a primary. And it was noted that it would turn the First Amendment on its head. And so it was like, just because you can't have a fair shot is how they talked about it. It doesn't mean that you can force somebody, because the party has the right to associate with each other and determine how they pick their nominees. So that court case is what Dr. Fleming was talking about and referring to.
Okay, thank you.
And Lori, I think when you make that telephone call on Tuesday, it's going to be important to have those up-to-date numbers on how many people wrote in, because I think when the Supreme Court hears that it wasn't a couple hundred or a couple thousand, it was over 100,000 people, whatever that number becomes, from Utah, that I think will get their attention, because that allows the Gorsuch and the panel, when they sit on this, to make a decision. And you need four of the Supreme Court judges to say, we want to hear the case. And that's what they do. They vote on it, they look on it. If you get four of them, if you've got your judge, Gorsuch, in favor of it, he's going to go to the next people right next to him that he knows he's talked to on the bench. And he's going to say, this is what we need to hear on this, and we need to rule on this. That's your pivotal point in this process.
I think it's also important to note that because the Deseret News and KSL and some of the news media that is in Cox's back pocket, they ran an article with a picture of Phil with a headline that said, Lyman drops out. So there were quite a few people that were showing up on social media saying, I voted for Cox because I'm a Republican, but I really wanted Phil Lyman. I just couldn't vote Democrat. And they were pretty upset, because unless you read the entire article, you didn't know that it wasn't Phil Lyman who dropped out, but the two Lymans who were just interfering with the election.
Yeah, and that speaks volumes. How many thousands or tens of thousands of people did not vote for him that would have cast their vote that direction, and how many people did they then talk to afterwards and go home and say, well, I couldn't vote for Lyman because he's not on the ticket and he's not running anymore, only to later find out they had been misdirected. Shall we say misdirected? We're going to be just nice about this.
And another point to point out is, everybody keeps saying that Phil Lyman keeps losing all these cases. Well, Utah is corrupt in every branch. And the judge that denied his petition that went up to the United States Supreme Court, he denied it based on this case that was already determined, but he only took a small portion of that case and used that to deny it. So he kind of twisted the ruling, and usually the United States Supreme Court doesn't like it when you mess up one of their rulings. So I'm hoping that that'll be the drive for them to hear it.
Well, I mean, the drive is that one of the times that the Supreme Court needs to hear cases is when different appellate courts rule differently on a point of law, because then the question becomes, what is the law in the United States? It cannot be dependent upon the jurisdiction or the area you're in. And that's why Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution, the Supreme Court of the United States, then has the obligation to say, okay, appellate courts, one of you is ruling one way, one of you is ruling another way. We need to have a law in the land. All right. And that's when the Supreme Court gets involved. Now you have a situation where an appellate court made a ruling. The Supreme Court looked at that in New York and said, this is the outcome. This is our ruling. And so for them to see another area of the country blatantly ignore what the Supreme Court has said, if the Supreme Court understands that that's what's happened, and that's where these telephone calls are critical, because imagine you're a clerk, which means you are a relatively recently graduated attorney, right? That's what a clerk is. They've just gone through law college. They may or may not have passed the bar, but they are sitting there now and they get to review these cases. And what they do is they review a case, they put a report together for whoever they're working for. And they say, Your Honor, this is what I think, the direction you should go. Now, it's always up to the justice to make that decision. But typically, they selected their law clerks. They know what their law clerks are familiar with. They picked them for a reason. So if the law clerk basically looks at it and says, wait a minute, this is a little different, and this calls into question our authority as the Supreme Court. This is where those telephone communications to the law clerk helps the law clerk, because they're going, and I just got, 25 cases over the weekend, right? And I have to docket these, which means I have to feed them into the computer system, and then I'm going to have to look at these. But now I have some young lady calling me from Utah, and she's explaining to me why this is important to the court, and she's working with me. Okay, well, the other 24 cases, nobody called me up to talk to me, right? So, and they're not, and they might even be a big, powerful law firm. But here's this young lady who's doing this, free, doing the very best as a paralegal, and submitting it to us. And you know what? I'm going to take a look at that. And believe it or not, attorneys are down deep, or really good people. Sometimes you have to go really deep to find them, but that's the old joke, how when a lawyer dies, how deep do you bury him? And the answer is 12 feet, because down deep they're really good.
Hey, Tracy, I have a question for you. How deep do you have to dig in the state of Utah to find a good attorney? And you can
I'm
please
still
shift on that, because I think I already know.
Lori, your audio's down, just to let you know.
Well, speaking of that, Spencer Cox is an attorney, and I don't know if we want to play that video right now, but it's to the whole point of this lawsuit, or this question to the Utah Supreme Court, and the other lawsuits that we're going to bring, is there should have never been a primary. They forced Phil to a primary when they shouldn't have. It was like a super veto, I guess, that he thought he had. So do you want to play that video?
Just a second. Lori, before that gets played,
Yes.
I'm sorry, not Lori, Tracy, before that gets played, please explain to people the purpose for filing this case, and what happened in Mr. Lyman's case, what he accomplished, and why that made him the candidate. And then Cox went against that, and now we play Cox saying what in essence makes Mr. Lyman, the actual candidate of choice. But lay that out for the people that may not be aware of it, please.
Okay. In Utah, the Republican Party selects its nominees through a caucus convention system. And what that means is, in caucus, our neighborhoods get together, we nominate people in our neighborhoods to be delegates, and those delegates go and vet all the candidates and pick the best one that we feel is the nominee. And we go to a nominating convention, and we vote on which candidate we think will be the best, that represents our platform and our party. Well, at convention, even in the party rules that were handed out this year while we were there, it says that if a candidate reaches over 60% of the delegate votes, then that candidate just goes directly to the general election, and you do not have a primary. And that's a direct primary, is where everybody votes in the party for and elects their nominee. And Phil received 67.45 or 54, I can't remember, percent.
5-4.
The votes 5-4. I knew he corrected
It
me.
rounds up. Yeah.
Yeah, but he received that, and he should have went on to a direct primary, but because Deidre determined that Spencer Cox collected 28,000 signatures, that trumped our internal procedures, and she forced a direct primary between Spencer and Phil.
So the
And in
GOP
Utah-
in the state of Utah has said the way we're going to select our candidate is by caucus, right? The Supreme Court of the United States in the New York case said the way that a party decides it's going to select its candidate is the privilege of the party under the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, free speech. So the laying of the foundation here is that the Supreme Court has agreed with the New York case that parties get to make their choice. In the state of Utah, the parties said the way we do this is with caucus, and if a certain percentage, over 60%, is achieved, that is the party's decision on what the candidate is. Mr. Lyman got 67.54%. What's going to happen now is you get to see Cox agreeing that this is how it's done, and yet went around behind the back of the people of Utah to violate what the Supreme Court said, what the GOP party has said, and what Mr. Lyman accomplished, right?
Right.
So
Yeah,
that's the
and
foundation. Go ahead.
I would add that this is Lieutenant Governor Cox before he became the governor, which means this is him as the referee for the election that was being held at the time. Because in Utah, the powers that be are in charge of the election, which caused Phil to be primaried. But this is what he believes as
Right.
the referee.
So pre his getting an opportunity to become governor, this video says, that's right. In Utah, it's a caucus. And if you get over 60%, like Mr. Lyman just did, you're the candidate, right? So this why this video is so important, because Cox can't have it both ways. He can't say we're going to follow the rules, which he says here in this video, and then when it came this election term, violate the rules, violate the party's right to how they wanted to do it, and in essence then violating the Supreme Court of the United States ruling in the New York case. Okay, is that right? Does that lay the foundation? I want the listeners to just know why this video is important.
Play it, Leighton.
So if I get 60%, I'm on the ballot. I don't have to have a primary. The rest of the Republicans in the state, 700,000 county, but statewide for Republicans, and I think it's the same for Democrats, if you get 60% of those delegates, you're the nominee, period. End of story. Okay? That's it. That's it.
And that's really the essence of the case.
Yeah.
You're the nominee, end of story, period. And yet he violated the method that was chosen by the GOP in the state of Utah, a method that the Supreme Court said the party has a right to choose. And despite having agreed that this is how it's done in the state of Utah, and Mr. Lyman got 67.5401%, Mr. Cox decides he's going to circumvent the Supreme Court's ruling, the GOP party platform, the decision made by the caucus members of the state of Utah, and go ahead and just do an end run and manipulate the system. Correct?
And let's
Yeah.
add to it, he was booed off the stage so bad. that
At
he
the
couldn't-
caucus.
At the
Correct.
caucus.
Convention.
At the
Convention.
state convention, that he couldn't even come back on stage. He had to send one of his little puppets.
Yeah, and I wanted to go over SB 54 and how it has grown and what I've learned through studying it. But the first substitute, which is this is what they were going to require from the primaries, and it was what I find this funny. It was to permit voters who are unaffiliated to vote in the primary. Well, that's a jungle primary. So when they come and threaten you, Utahns, and they say, "Oh no, big bad money's coming," they're going to start jungle primaries. They've already tried it. So the first one was to permit voters who are unaffiliated to vote in your primary. And then they wanted to be able to have the neighborhood caucuses open for 2 days. And then they wanted to have the nominated conventions. You can either vote remotely or absentee in case one of the delegates couldn't attend. And then they also wanted the parties, they wanted to codify the threshold of when you could receive the nomination and avoid a direct primary. So you can go to the next slide, and it shows that the party did not like this. So they said, no way are you putting that into SB 54. So they said, there's no way we can do a 2-day caucus system. That's too hard. And what I found funny is they denied it there, but somehow it's now in our nominating, at least in my county, we can do the ballots, the absentee ballots now, which is, they said that they wouldn't do it for SB 54. And then the party put their foot down and said, no, you're not codifying that. And probably somebody warned them right then, as that's an internal proceeding. You can't do that. So instead, they replaced the language that you can't hold a party nominating convention before April 1st. And you have to permit the signature through convention process, signature process, or both. That's how you seek your nomination. They changed it. But that's how it passed. And so if you go to the next slide, in 2015, there was a court case which involved Spencer Cox. So he knows about this, and it was with the Republican Party. And they determined that those jungle primaries are unconstitutional. So the same sponsors of SB 54 come in and sponsor Senate Bill 207 in 2015 while this lawsuit is taking place. And they're hurrying and saying, oh, we got to take that out. So they took out the jungle primaries. And then they wanted to clarify the signature part, because their intention was never to require a party to allow someone to gather signatures and subvert their convention. That wasn't their intention. So they were hurrying and trying to fix all this, because during the court cases, they're saying, no, that's unconstitutional. They wouldn't force you, and this bill doesn't do it. So they went in further and cleaned up the language to permit someone who's a continuing political party that already polled 2%. They don't need to prove that their candidates have enough support. So their candidates do not need to gather signatures, because they've already proved that they can poll 2% or more of the total votes of the candidates for the U.S. House rep. And I could show you on that next slide what that means. That means, if you see here, I don't know if you could, a little bit small, but
Make it full screen, Leighton.
It's like 69% out of all the U.S. House candidates. These are the people that poll over it. I mean, pretty much everybody hits 2%. So their candidates don't have to gather signatures. That's expensive. So that was the purpose. And the silly thing is, though, is they never came back and corrected it. They never came back and said, hey, we're applying this wrong. But those two senators, or those two legislative sponsors, went back and even tried to clarify it further, that this law didn't apply to the Republican Party and that we should not be receiving signatures. They just went along with it.
Hey, Tracy, how does somebody, a citizen from Utah, how do they get a copy of this? Is it for public knowledge?
The bills?
Document.
Oh,
Yeah,
this document? Yeah, this is on the Lieutenant Governor's website. There's history. This is from the 2020 election. And so there's history of all elections on there, just to show you the number of votes and stuff like that. But it's history on there. And the Senate bills are on there, but you have to have that legal mind and to go back and look through. But Dan McKay is my representative and he's a lawyer. So you can't tell me he didn't know. And I believe Kurt Bramble knew, and they just were silent. They just allowed Spencer Cox to continue to misapply this law. It never required the signatures, never. And they misapplied it this entire time, and they've allowed it. And the parties, go ahead.
The hard part with that is, if you're listening, if they continue to do this, Spencer Cox has no term limits, and he doesn't even bother to show the signatures that make him a candidate, even if you thought SB 54 was legal. So you end up basically with a dynasty. You know, if you have enough money, you can get on the ballot. And if you happen to be the sitting governor and your lieutenant governor gets to referee your game, you win every time. If he really wanted to put this to bed, he'd release his signatures and say, look, I got enough signatures. SB 54 was the thing. Lyman doesn't know what he's talking about, but he won't release the signatures because he doesn't have enough signatures, outside of the fact that he was misapplying SB 54.
Right. And then it goes further in corruption, because even the Utah Republican Party is a part of it. And on the next slide, that will show today during the State Central Committee meeting, they specifically wrote a bylaw and is trying to pass it for anybody that shows support for a write-in candidate or somebody that they declare non-Republican Party candidate. Well, to me, according to our rules, Phil Lyman is the nominee. He got over 60%, and now they're trying to write bylaws that will kick me out of leadership positions, and they're telling us how bad we are.
Tracy, can you talk about this again? Just so that the listeners really understand, because this is the first I am seeing this.
So, okay, so a state central committee is the governing body of the Utah Republican Party. They set the rules and they kind of influence legislation because of our party platform. So that's the purpose of them. And so they hold these state central committee meetings where they pass bylaws of the party. And this one was today and I don't know if it's gone through or not, but they passed it out to say you cannot show any support. And it specifically wrote for this situation, because they said you cannot show support for a candidate that's not the party nominee. And then they declare the party nominee someone that's lost the Republican primary in their race or is a write-in candidate. Well, Phil didn't lose to me. He was cheated. I was cheated because I was a delegate and I voted for him. I wasted all my time. There's no point of our convention if you're just going to veto it and put people to a vote on the direct primary.
But Tracy, this is even more fundamental than that. I mean, one, it's coming on the heels of the election where Mr. Lyman had such a significant, over 100,000 write-in people wrote in his name and oval, number one. Number two, this is what they're trying to do here is to take away your freedoms. Mm-hmm. You will no longer have the freedom to endorse somebody that you want to endorse. So independent upon who this write-in is, whether you consider Mr. Lyman to have won it anyway, which is part of the topic, but the fact that they're trying to now say you do not have the freedom to endorse who you want means that they are trying to strip you of a fundamental right as an American citizen and as a Utahn.
Yeah, and I want to make a correction. I misspoke. This is a county central committee. This isn't the state central committee. This is happening at a Utah County state.
And it doesn't matter whether it's a state or a county or a city or a neighborhood association. You know, God, that they actually get to that point. But this is somebody who's decided that they are going to tell you that you cannot speak out for the candidate of your choice. And that is one of the fundamental principles of this country.
Right. And part of our party platform says that we will call out corruption and we will fight against it. And so now they're stifling these people when they say that's not right. He won.
Well, and this goes to Jim's point that he was making about how this lays a foundation for Cox to never lose power, or the people that they want to lose power, because they've gone one step further now. And not only are they trying to control who can run, they're also trying to make certain that if somebody else is trying to run, that they are stopped, that people can't talk about it. It's Marxist.
It is. And they've gone further and removed a state central committee, Casey Gale, from his free speech. They removed him as a state central committee. And when they did that, they did it in a secret meeting. They were trying to cover windows so we couldn't see in. And the corruption's got to stop.
I would say at this, I'm sorry, at this point in time, just before you get that in there, at this point in time, I think there needs to be, in addition to going to the Supreme Court and making people aware of this, at this point in time, I think you need to initiate an action in the state of Utah to call for one, FOIA request to make certain the number of signatures were there, and number two, to raise the issue of impeachment.
So this, this also kind of goes to the color of law argument. So many things that have happened on this. We're not going to allow you to have the lieutenant governor that you want. We're gonna prevent him from even coming into the office. So so they block us on that. We go to convention, we win that. We go to the primary against our will. And the primary, we've claimed, I think we won the primary. They won't allow us to look at any of those records. In fact, they're calling anyone a criminal who even suggests that we should have the idea. The lieutenant governor has threatened the county clerks. And then you go to the actual signatures, and we're fighting that. At the same time, there was a sheriff in Washington County. They were having a rally down there for, a thank you to the GOP. And a lot of these delegates are our delegates. We wanted to go and tell them thank you as well. Said anyone that shows up there with a Lyman shirt on, there's plenty of room in my jail, and they will be trespassed. So it is very Marxist, Dr. Fleming, and that's the feeling that you start to get. And I think if people see the color of law on this, that they really see what's like, kind of this really disgusting undercurrent of, like I said, ridicule and belittling. And that's why we've tried so hard to get this out of Utah, because everything in Utah, that's like, you've got leadership in the legislature that jumps right on board with that. You've got leadership in the judicial system that jumps on board with that. You've got the GOP leadership that jumps on board with that. You've got the lieutenant governor that's doing these things that in any other setting, if you saw it clearly, it would be a circus. It would be a total clown show. Yet because everybody's doing it in Utah, you got the people, the very ones that should be able to stand up and call it out, are intimidated, and they really don't dare call it out. Legislators and others.
That's a good word, Phil, is intimidated, because that's exactly what they have done, is they have intimidated the weak. I have a
so let me just interject one thing.
Okay.
In Utah, all of the people he's talking about, the judges, the clerks, they're appointed. So you've got the judges are appointed, and you've got the grammar board, which is supposed to be the transparency board that gives you the records when they're asked for by the candidate whose opponent claims they got enough signatures, and who our own legislature said, nah, we don't know that he did get all those signatures. And the people that verified the signatures, there was only one person that passed the prerequisite training to verify signatures. But nobody has the right to see them because everybody's worried about their job.
Right.
And this is very consistent with the presidential election that we just went through. Had the Democrats won, they would have been in the same position that Cox is right now, which is victory, success. They lost. And so what's the conversation going on now? Well, why did we lose? Oh, it's Biden's fault. Biden didn't drop out soon enough. It's maybe we should have had a convention and actually asked the people who the candidate should be. That's the problem. It's never their fault. It's never the upper hierarchy of, in this case, the National Democratic Committee, that they stepped out of line, they didn't follow the rules, they didn't have the process fulfilled that actually the National Democratic Committee agreed to. This presidential election was a classic example at the presidential level of the Democrats not following through with the process that they had laid out. And the consequence of it was either going to be an election that they won and they wouldn't have said anything about it. But now the consequences, they lost. So who can they blame? And you have a situation, we've established this nationally, you're establishing it in Utah by virtue of what we're talking about here in this case, where it's now going to be finger pointing. If we can't manipulate it, we're going to point fingers at who we can blame. It will never be acceptance of the fact that what they did originally was wrong and violated the standards that were set up.
And to Phil's point about the color of law, I actually tried to teach the state central committee about that. I sent them a notice of intent to say, hey, because you are actually, the convention system is delegated from the state for us to, it's an election. It's a legitimate election. And so if you're violating it and it's broken and you know about it, you could be personally liable. And when I went, about 50% of them were like, oh my gosh, come in here and teach the rest of the body. But when I went there, the state party chair, the vice chair, they called the cops and tried to have me removed. And it was an open meeting, and I was invited there to speak about it, to talk about this color of law that Phil is talking about. So it's lessons that need to be learned from all this.
Another along those lines, and hallelujah for what happened last Tuesday. Go President Trump. It's an exciting thing, and I don't know what that's going to change. But this narrative that, oh well, the election's done, and judges are very reticent to overturn an election, so there's nothing that will ever happen here. I mean, that's another color of law argument of you can't win because the election's already done. Sorry. And this appeal to authority, everyone agrees with us on this. And I don't know, Dr. Fleming, if you've seen elections overturned, or Tracy, if you have, but or gone back and have those elections redone. But I reject that notion that just because they cheated 4 times in a row and got away with it, that now it's altogether too late. So we'll just deal with this in 4 years. And that is the total scheme of Spencer Cox and the Marxists, is to say, hey, sorry, we're going to work on this. We got this audit report, legislature. We're really going to dig in our heels. And believe me, 4 years from now, we're going to have a clean election.
Here's what I find inconsistent. We're filled with a country that most of the people claim it's good that we're here. Well, we're here because the people who founded this country didn't go along with just go along because we're telling you to do it. Tina Peters is in prison right now, and they tried to tell her certain things. And even in prison, she said, I want to see the rules. When we get a society that no longer stands up and says, I need to see the rules, I need to know that this is right. And even if this is what the rules are, we believe it's a wrong thing that needs to be addressed. When we get to a society that we no longer do that, we will have a completely Marxist society.
Yeah.
And you can't live in this country and not have me respond to you by saying that's the standard you want to live, and then tell me you're proud to be a citizen of this country when the very foundation of it was written up by people who every one of them was a criminal, because to stand up against the King of England made them a criminal. What did they pay for? Their lives, their families, their homes, everything that they promised to pay for. So in this society, what we're seeing is we're turning around to either recognize that sometimes you're going to be called a criminal, or you're going to at least have to stand up against real criminals to call it wrong, correct it, and move society forward, but a society that will acquiesce and surrender all of its rights and privileges. This is what happened during the pandemic. Everybody was willing to surrender their rights and privileges under the pretense that it would make them more secure. Do you know who really first talked about that in history? Goering at his Nuremberg trials, where he pointed out that all you needed to do to control people was tell them there's a problem, tell them what the answer to the problem is, and tell them that anybody who disagrees with that is a threat to society and should be threatened and dealt with as a society. When you have a problem and you do not address it as individuals, you have given complete authority to these people. And when Benjamin Franklin said, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it," that's what he meant. Because when the people will not fight for their republic, and it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I feel sometimes like I'm talking to elementary students when I say, boys and girls, it's a challenge to step up. But you know what? As adults, it's time that we act like adults. As adults who claim we want to live in a free society, it's time we act like we want to live in a free society. It's time we take action civilly, with discourse, and pursue the rule of law to make it work. Does it always work? No, it doesn't. But it doesn't work if you don't try. It's kind of like being at a high school dance. If you don't ask the girl across the room if she wants to dance, guess what? She won't turn you down, but you won't be dancing with her either.
So that's,
Utahns, decide if you want to dance.
I think from my standpoint, and this is not about me wanting to be the governor. That's never been the objective. The whole thing has been wanting to uncover all this corruption. But there's one path that is correct, and that would be to redo this general election with myself on the ballot. I'm glad to go head to head against Brian King without Spencer Cox on the ballot. Anything less than that is just more color of law. It's just more, sleight of hand, smoke and mirrors. And I hope Utah will recognize that if they want this to be fixed, they've got to fix it. They've got to fix it now. Anything they do after this, legislatively, judicially, the lieutenant governor's office, all of it's a kangaroo court, Mickey Mouse circus. So
To say, you know what, before we go on to the next point, Juan 07 is going to be joining us. He actually we just lost him, but he'll be reconnecting. So for those of you who don't know Juan 07, Juan 07 gained attention primarily on alternative media platforms, which is awesome. He discusses American politics, current events, and sometimes speculative topics. Phil, you met him at the Constitutional Sheriff meeting when you were there in Las Vegas a couple months ago. Dr. Fleming.
Met him a little over a year ago down in Arizona. Yeah.
Yes. Totally amazing. So he is going to be joining us soon. And so are we ready for the video? Are we ready for the papers, Phil, on your end?
Yeah, I could run through those real quick
Okay.
if you want me to do that. Yeah.
Sure.
These are just more along the signature contest that's going on now, because there's a lot of false narrative there. But there was a legislative audit that was done by the internal auditors, by the legislative auditors, and people don't really understand the difference between an internal audit and an independent audit. But the main thing is that employees of the state perform a legislative audit, and their purpose is to improve processes. So yeah, you can see there, if you go to that website, I don't know if you'll be able to see that closer for those that are viewing it, but you can get to there, you can come down and you can click on the full report and you can read the full report. And nobody here is trying to, misrepresent what that report says. If you want to go to that next slide. So this was the conclusion that we asked for three individuals, and then they also asked, and I guess I want to be clear on this. I had been asking for a legislative audit for a couple of months. And I finally, I talked to the Speaker of the House and I said, am I the only one that cares about this? Shouldn't it be somebody just besides the candidate who wants to know if this was done right? And we had implicated these three, Spencer Cox, I shouldn't say implicated, but they all gathered signatures. They were all at the state convention. They all lost by, more, none of them got 40%. So it made sense. I wasn't questioning whether they got their signatures other than Spencer Cox, but this is what they came back with, is that Spencer Cox likely was short, had his tally decreased by 572. John Curtis's decreased by 400, and Derek's decreased by 140. And if you want to go to that next slide, this is just my analysis on this. And I don't know if you'll be able to see that either, but there were some estimates because we learned that some of those had gone to the Attorney General's office, large portions, a few on Curtis, a few on Brown, and the word from the internal auditor was thousands on Spencer Cox. And the reason they went to the Attorney General's office is because there's packets, dozens of packets that were clearly filled out by the same person. That's called fraud. It's called it's faking the signatures, whatever the case may be. But instead of including those in the totals, we don't know what they are. We just know they were turned over to the Attorney General's office. You come down, you follow those numbers down. So my estimate is that there was about 194 short on Spencer Cox. The other two had plenty of additional signatures. Someone has said, oh, well, that's just statistical. There's still a chance he could have won it. Well, they did a sample size of 1,000, and on 28,000, if you can read that bottom line down there, on 28,000, a statistical sample of 1,000 would give you a 99.81% certainty rate on that specifically. So you can go to that last one, and then I'll get out of the way here. And then this one is just talking about the audit itself. I've heard a lot of people say, in fact, the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate said the candidates fulfilled the requirements to qualify for the ballot. That is not what the internal auditor said. Said candidates fulfilled the requirements that were given to them. So basically, they followed the rules. They still lost. If you go down to the bottom of that, it says moving forward, if they don't fix this, we're going to have unreliable, validated signatures in the future. That's a lawsuit against the Davis County Clerk. That doesn't mean that the governor automatically wins. That means that he loses, and he's got a lawsuit against the clerk. I'll turn over to Juan because I'm having a hard time hearing past that. So.
No, but Phil, just before we go.
Well, I can turn off my mic here. I'm enjoying listening to you. So
Hey.
I'll turn off my mic.
Oh no, it's your. I'll always defer to you, Juan.
So Juan, since you're on,
Well, and I apologize. But yeah, go ahead.
oh, that's
Yeah.
okay. So you've been following this pretty close. Can we get some of your thoughts now that we have you on?
Well, I had perfect cell phone just a second ago. Maybe I'm screwing it up here. Give me just a second, and I'll come back in. You guys go ahead for a second. I'll get just a little bit stronger, and I'll stop where I'm at.
Perfect.
Okay.
So Phil, can you just repeat that since there was just a little bit of static on there? Leighton, can you bring that document back up so Phil can just repeat what he said on that, please?
Yeah. So down there at the very bottom, and I guess the statement that has been made by the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate is that the candidates fulfilled the requirements to qualify for the ballot. The audit does not say that. There's nowhere it says that they qualified for the ballot. What it says is they fulfilled the requirements given to them. And at the bottom, it says if they don't make changes to this moving forward, that they're going to continue to get invalidated signatures or problems with the signature process moving forward. And it's also important to note here that the legislative auditors, who I have just tremendous respect for, I really like what these guys do, and I respect them. But 2 years ago, they did a legislative audit on the elections, also largely caused by my work and my pushing for election integrity. And one of their recommendation was that they have to do some training on signature verification. So now they go back in and they want to say, did you follow the signature verification training that you set up by our recommendation? And the answer is no, they didn't follow the training. In fact, nobody really had the training, and still they're getting these bad returns. And my contention there again is that if Spencer Cox has a gripe, he's got a good lawsuit against the Davis County clerk. He does not have a good argument to say, especially since he oversees all of this. He does not have a good argument to say it wasn't my fault that I didn't get the signatures. So give me credit for having gotten the signatures anyway.
Yeah.
So in recap of that, for the listeners that may not have spent as much time on this, what you're saying is that the internal audit that was asked for, looked at whether Cox received enough signatures to allow him to run as a candidate in this election. And the conclusion from the auditors was that there was not a sufficient number of signatures to even allow him to run. And to Jim's point, the argument is, well, Mr. Cox, despite the internal audit, if you actually have these signatures, please present them to someone who can validate that you had the right to run for office, because the internal audit says otherwise, correct? Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, no, that's correct. And the other, again, this other, salt in the wound is all of these people that are now saying, oh, he qualified. Before they did the audit, were saying, how dare you question his signatures? Of course he got his signatures. He qualifies because he got his signatures. He has plenty of signatures. As soon as it comes out that he didn't get his signatures, then they flip their story. He didn't need to actually get the signatures. He had to just follow these requirements. So again, it's just this weird heads I win, tails you lose thing over and over and
Right.
over.
So number one, the Supreme Court has said that political parties, in this case the Republican Party, has the right to decide how it will pick its candidates.
Right.
Cox, when he was lieutenant governor, says, if you get more than 60, that's it, period, end of story. You went through the process. You had 67.54%. You're the candidate, period, end of story. Then Mr. Cox comes along trying to use the SB 54 approach and says, I'm going to get signatures. But lo and behold, if you actually follow the internal audit, even that was not enough signatures. And to Jim's point, he won't show anybody that he got enough signatures. But now the story becomes, well, it doesn't matter if I get enough signatures. So it doesn't matter that he didn't get 60% of the caucus. It doesn't matter that he didn't get the number of signatures that he needed. It just doesn't matter, because Cox wants to run as the GOP candidate, and they're writing legislation now, or not legislation, but even at the county level, trying to say you can't voice your preference for any particular candidate, particularly if it's a write-in, because I want to be governor, and by golly, I will do whatever I have to do to be governor, but I will not allow the people of Utah to actually determine how their parties pick their candidates or who gets to run. I'm just going to be your governor, and that's Marxist.
Yeah.
Bingo.
Agreed. So
For me, it's akin to, at the Super Bowl, you call the game because you got your touchdown, and when they review the play, they find out that you're 3 yards short, but because they're the refs of their own game, they say, don't worry about it. We had extra time. We probably could have got that if we really tried.
And that's frequently why Iowa loses.
So Juan, I don't know if you can bring yourself in. Your drive looks beautiful. You've been following it pretty close. Can you chime in on what's happening with Phil here? Do we lose him?
I think he's
It
froze.
looks like it's frozen, yeah.
But I wanted to comment. So essentially, Utah, nobody qualified to even be your candidate except for Phil, and they wouldn't even put him on the ballot. So essentially, they sent out a counterfeit ballot, and Put it in the middle.
Let's be honest. The Democrats actually didn't cheat in this, right?
Right.
I mean, so if you're a Republican in Utah, right now you should be upset because the Democrats actually played by their rules, and your party did not.
Yep.
And if you're a Republican right now in Utah, that should bother you. That nobody in the system cared enough about what you wanted as a voter in Utah. Go ahead.
Yep.
So with what you just said, Dr. Fleming, Joe Watson is asking a question on there. So can we call a special election based on how SCOTUS comes back?
Well, I think if the Supreme Court of the United States comes back and does something, it's going to tell you what you're going to do.
Agreed.
It's so you don't have to lay down any questions about what we should be able to do. The Supreme Court is it's going to remand things back. If it takes the case, it will remand back and tell you what's going to happen, because in the end, it's the Supreme Court that determines the law in this country. And right now, the powers in Utah have decided that they no longer live under the United States Constitution.
Yep. We live under a king.
Oh, golly gee, no. I've seen kings. Cox is not one.
Yeah. Right.
He's I don't know what you call him.
A Democrat?
But he's not a king. I'm sorry?
I said I'd call him a Democrat.
Well, I wouldn't insult the Democrats.
Okay, so remember that I'm a
kidding.
JFK Democrat and all this.
Yeah, I wouldn't insult Democrats.
And the founding fathers are what, independents or Whigs or something like that. So, and the beauty of this is these titles that we have, Republican, Democrat, whatever. You notice that what happened here in this election is that people like myself, people like Gabbard, people like Bobby, all decided that we didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left us. And in the state of Utah, the Republican Party left the Republican voters.
Yep.
And you kind of have to come to terms with that. It doesn't mean you're Democrat, but I think it means you have to look at what's going on in the party. And you have to call accountability. And you live in your state in Utah. I live in Texas. I'm not, nobody cares what I think in Utah as far as, well, maybe somebody does. But, it's the Utahns that have to take action here. And I think while you're waiting on the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will tell you what it's going to do, you need to start raising the issues about whether the votes are valid. You need to call for a FOIA request to validate that he even had the right to run. And you need to look into the legal actions on impeaching Cox as governor.
As I've looked at this, also, it's kind of dawned on me. We talk about these things in real political terms, and but if we go to the 2020 election with President Trump, who I believe won that election hands down, but because of everything else that happened, we have a different president for 4 years. And yeah, politically, it makes for a really good discussion. But the net effect is you have policies that are really destroying people's lives that these people are unwilling to turn loose of. You get, on a national level, hundreds of billions of dollars going to Ukraine, finding its way back into politicians' pockets, while innocent, honest people, are dying in these horrible, horrific consequences of really bad policy. So it's not. It reminds me of that Greek philosopher, I don't remember his name, that said, that the boys throw stones at the frogs for fun, but the frogs die not in fun, but in earnest. And that's that's what we see happening on the bottom side of this, is people's whose lives are turned upside down unfairly, relying on honest elected officials only to find that they don't exist, or if they do exist, they're not able to overcome the dishonest ones. It's a travesty.
Phil, how do we ask for a special election? I mean, is it even possible?
I think it's imperative that they redo the election. I think, and Tracy has, and I have talked about this. She could probably, but what we have is a counterfeit ballot. We had a counterfeit primary ballot. We've got a counterfeit general election ballot. That's against the law. It's a felony. I think someone needs to be prosecuted for that. And the only way to remedy that is to acknowledge that, oh, that's a counterfeit. That ballot was not a real ballot, and we have not had a real election yet in the state of Utah, and we've got to go back and have one. If we don't do that, then we're going to go forward on something that simply doesn't exist. I don't know, Tracy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Utah code was written for these specific things to happen. That's how we know the term counterfeit ballot. It's an election offense written in our code. And the only person that can do a counterfeit ballot are the people that have the power to, and that's lieutenant governor and the governor. The lieutenant governor certifies that list of candidates on that ballot, and the governor is supposed to be overseeing her. That is part of his duty. She's administral, and he's supposed to be overseeing and making sure things are done correctly. But they sent out, and I frankly think Spencer Cox has been doing it for years since he was appointed. Since he was appointed in 2014, we have not had free and fair elections because he has been sending out these fake ballots and deciding he's picking and choosing who's going to win. And it's going to be through money. It's people who have the most money. And that's what has happened here. But yes, we're going to have instructions. I'm actually going to have a website called poisonedpower.com. And we'll have a section for giving Utah's antidote, how we get rid of this poison that's in Utah right now. And it's in the people that have power. And we'll have a list of what you can do. You don't want to try to stop any election officials, but we'll have a list of what you can do and how you can write your legislature and what's available to Utah to correct this crime.
Tracy, as we're waiting for Juan, hopefully he can join us, but you had something important a week ago when we were all on our call about what they shouldn't be saying because it could be held against them. And when I'm talking about the citizens of Utah, on how to word something.
Yeah, the laws are really written for the government. It's to govern the government, but they misapply them and twist them and apply them to we the people incorrectly all the time. And there was a law written that says you can't prevent an elected official from doing their job. Well, Deidre is a tyrant and a Marxist, and so she will twist that law and say you can't. If you say you can't certify the election, she'll twist it. So we're going to say more as you can certify, but you have to certify with errors. And to me, they're just certifying that it was done incorrectly and it needs to be redone is what we need to ask them for. So we're not stopping them from certifying the election. Go ahead, certify it, but certify it with errors because they already incorrectly certified the primary. So
okay, so we're waiting for Juan. He's got a signal. So basically, you are saying that if citizens of Utah accidentally say that they could be held criminally responsible?
She'll try because she's tried to do it to me. There's this sill during our flag initiative when they stole our flag. It was whirling around and it said, we are the people around it. And it had our flag symbols. And she wrote me a letter, a cease and desist letter, and threatened me with a felony for misuse of the sill. And I fired back at her and told her to back off because that law applies to her, not me. I don't have the power to misuse it. People see me and they're like, that's not the lieutenant governor. But it was just the symbols of we the people. I can't misuse it. I don't have any power to. She's the one. And then she turned around and did misuse it. She used it to denounce Natalie Klein who was a candidate of our state school board, and she posted it on Twitter. She turned around, even though I told her that law applies to you, she turned around and misused that SIL to denounce a citizen who was running for office, and it was wrong, and she should be held accountable. And we did, we filed an ethics complaint, but it's gone. Who knows where it went, because they didn't do anything to her.
Loria, what I've seen is there's no depths to which this administration won't sink. Right now, you've got Aaron Davidson, a clerk in Utah County, who is standing up and saying, "I want some transparency. I want to be able to, examine my own records as a clerk." And Deidre is not going after any clerk in the state. She's only going after Aaron Davidson, and she's going after him hard, and threatening a criminal prosecution. They sent a plane down to Arizona to get paper for the Utah County election. They came back and said, "Oh, how horrible is he doing? He had one job and he can't even keep the paper." He comes back and says, "We weren't out of paper. I didn't ask them to do that. We weren't asking for that." So you get this show going on, and then you get the Todd Weilers and the Mike McKells of the Senate that are jumping on board and going after an innocent, at least an earnest county clerk, when Deidre is committing actual crimes and nothing happens to her.
Can you say Tina Peters?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Who goes to jail? It's not the honest people.
This is a woman who nobody raises the question. This is a repeated thing, by the way. Yeah. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about Dr. Moore or Tina Peters or anybody else. When they do not want to look at the facts, they will come up with a way to manipulate the rules. And in law, this is, if you have the facts, you win on the facts. If you can't win on the facts, you win on the procedure. If you can't win on the procedure, obfuscate, right?
Right.
And that's how they did it with me. That's how they did it with Tina Peters. That's how they did it with Donald Trump. That's how they're going to try and do it with your clerk. And if the people in Utah are asking the question about whether they should become active, when you see this in your own backyard, recognize you are not the first. Mm-hmm. Tina Peters was not the first. Donald Trump was not the first. I hope to God I was not the first. But the reality is they get more brazen every time they are successful, and the people do not stand up. And by the way, Tracy, we the people's in the United States Constitution. It's not the power of some Yahoo Deidre lieutenant governor wannabe powerful future Kamala Harris type mentality. Karl Marx is dead. And that should be maybe your slogan. Karl Marx is dead. Mm-hmm. It didn't work out for him. It doesn't work out whenever it's done. There comes a time when the people are so abused that they will finally get up and fight back. But it is a better society when we do not allow it to get that far down the rabbit hole, that we have something still worth salvaging, that we haven't lost the benefit, the stability, the quality of what's in the country. It's kind of like Health and Human Services. We're not going to address Health and Human Services by slashing the heck out of it. You can't solve a problem until you know what the problem is. We're going to have to go in and look at the departments and address the problems from the inside with knowledge. This random slashing, not caring, not standing up, and not doing the right thing has never been the way that tyrants, Marxists, or anybody else have been dealt with. They have only been dealt with, like the founding fathers showed us, by putting everything on the line, by willing to stand up and do the right thing, and then to not be deterred from doing it, and not waiting for someone else to come over the hill as the cavalry, because there isn't one. If you're not it, you don't have one.
Agreed. Hey, Juan, are you there? Hey, Leighton,
I had my mic muted. I'm sorry.
so can you chime in? I know you've been following
Yep.
this really closely. Thank you.
Well, here's the deal, and I apologize. I have one of my hot rods that's got an old school ignition in it, and I guess it was interrupting the phone, so I didn't realize that until I pulled over and shut it off. So my concern is that the people of Utah, they need to kind of collectively understand your nature, the way that you approach life is being taken advantage of by bullies. You don't want to fight. You're not really mentally, emotionally looking for fights. And you've got a crowd that has somebody that they're puppeteering. It's not Cox, it's the people behind Cox. And what they've done is they've taken advantage of your personality. And it's very similar to the way things were going back at the beginning of this country. The whole King George thing. Tell them this is the way it's going to be, and we're not asking them, we're telling them. Here's how it's going to go. We started our whole country on the idea that we need self-governance. Well, if you can't have the candidate of your party that was properly duly elected to run as your party's person, then what do you got? You got nothing. You have nothing. You are just get along, go along, and they're going to take advantage of you. And by the way, there's probably a few folks in here that understand that's the way the intimidation works, even to the extreme of these predatory rapists. They will take advantage of the weakness of a child or a young person, or the inability for them to pose much of a fight back, and then they just get whatever these people want to dish out. That is not a bad analogy, because they're going to get into office and they're going to spend money that you didn't want to spend on things that goes to people that favor them. And they're not going to spend money on the stuff that favors this crowd that was here all about reform. Remember, Phil, you and I, when we talked, the whole basis of our meeting the first time was, how are we going to make Utah independent so it's self-sufficient in every category possible? Fuel, electricity, food, for an out-of-control federal government. How are we going to change the rules so that Utah can have the handcuffs taken off of it and begin to operate not beholden to or looking to the largesse of federal government, with all those federal lands and control into Utah? And now somebody behind the scenes who doesn't want what you would bring to Utah, Phil, has got control of the situation. They're just going to power over you. They're just going to bully you and power over you. And it doesn't matter what you say. Well, that's where Utahns have to break out in numbers. Part of the reason they're going to beat you is because you're just not showing up in the numbers. A few activists show up, a few people that take it very personal, that have some skin in the game, and they decide to do it. But the majority of people in Utah, they just don't want to hassle. They're just trying to live life. They just want their, microwaves and radial tires. Leave me alone. And there's a moment where you have to say, okay, done. And now we're getting up and fighting, because I can tell you this much too. One of the toughest guys that I ever got to work with was out of Utah, farm boy. And I'll tell you what, if he hit something, it didn't get back up. I am serious as can be. He'd throw bales of hay and compete with my friend out of Montana how far up they could throw the bales of hay into the barn as they were getting down off the semi, delivering bales. It was unbelievable. These guys were just machines. That's out there. You got those people in Utah. You got that attitude. How many moms out there have to do, I mean, unbelievable work just to get the kids in the household going before anybody else even sees the light of day? You've got people in Utah with that skill set, those abilities, that mental focus. But there's certain times when it reaches a point, you have got to decide that you're going to, this is a fight that you got to fight. There's a moment where you can't back down anymore. This is that moment. And by the way, it's like what happened over in Iran. When Iran tried to get control of the mullahs, and the people showed up everywhere, the government sent the tanks into the streets, the police showed up and everything else. And it really decimated a lot of the Iranian people. That was during the Obama administration. Now, 8 years later, they are livid. And you know what's going on now? It's actually 10 years ago. In Iran, they literally told the police chiefs, if you do anything to stop the people with what we're doing to take out the mullahs, we aren't just going to come for you. We're coming for your mom. We're coming for your sister. We're going to freaking throw them all in jail because it's a whole family operation. We're not taking it. And the same thing to the military. And so you go out and around Iran. Not the bases, not the police headquarters, which the Israelis hit. The people have had it, and the government's actually kind of a shell of what it was. They're not doing stuff out through the hinterlands. They've had to back off massively. If your government is not in compliance with the law, why should you have to? That's the real risk. When every person that participated in the American Revolution, not Civil War, Revolution, was a lawbreaker. There's a moment when if the law is not going to be followed by the people in office, how do they get there? Whose law are they following? Contract law is contract law is contract law. You made a contract. This is how we do it. And now they're just going to set that aside and power through. It's like Cox is in the getaway. I didn't have anything to do with it. I didn't rob the bank. I was listening to the stereo in the car, and I had the heater on because it was a little nippy out. And so I was just sitting in the car minding my own business. These guys got in the car. They had bags of money. I don't know what happened inside the bank, but I didn't rob the bank. Bullshit.
Calling it out.
Total, complete bullshit. He is in on this bank robbery from the get-go.
Yep.
That whole thing with the other candidates with the same last name should never, ever have been allowed to go. So at what point do you get pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to get out of the corner? Look, I don't think you'll ever get a better candidate for governor than what you've got with Phil, who also got pushed and took it, had to go all the way to the wall. It was only because Trump pardoned him. They were getting away with it at the federal level. If you don't push back now, you get what you get. No complaining down the road because you got what you wanted. You get there's sins of commission, sins of omission. And if you won't take your country back, won't take your state back, then you get what you get.
Hey, Juan.
Yeah.
Phil, before
ahead.
you make that comment, Juan, you made a really good point that there are really strong people in Utah. And you made the comment about the microwave, which I laughed at. Just think about these people. When their microwave goes out, they do everything to replace it. They go to Walmart, they order on Amazon, they do whatever it takes. Now we're talking about our frickin' freedom. And there's not enough of those strong people standing up because they feel like people like Jim or people like Dr. Fleming, people like Tracy are going to do the work for them, but we can't do it. We need you. You're freedom is broke just like your microwave was broken. I just wanted to make that comment. So go
Well,
ahead, Phil.
let me just add one thing here, and that is when I was young, I was put into school a year early. So all the kids were almost a full year older than me. Some of the kids were almost 2 years older than me. And I was small because I was 2 years younger. Like I get picked for a lot of the sports and stuff like that. I was not. I was the second smallest kid in my class, and the kid that was smaller than me was an actual person that was had a growth issue, and so I kind of operated in that mode. And there was one particular guy that would always pick on me, and in fifth grade, actually sixth grade, he had done something that made kind of a damage to something that I had, and it was very upsetting. And he was just being a smart ass and doing what he always did, and it was fairly expensive. And I had amazingly started to go into my growth spurt. I was catching up with all the other guys, and it just came on me out of nowhere. And I pinned him to the statements, and the adrenaline was rushing, and it was pretty dramatic. And from that point forward, I never got pushed by him again or anybody else. And I started to catch up in the sports and performance and stuff like that. There's a moment where you come of age. I'm telling you, your personality of get along, go along, which is what we want. I love it. I love to be able to have a nice conversation with people. I like people that, are courteous and hold the door, or I get to hold the door for them. They say thank you. That's part of what I love about Utah, but it's being used against you. You have to recognize that and break out of that mold. No and hell no. You cannot bully us like this and get away with it. And if the courts won't vote right, we'll kick those people out of the court. And if we cannot get the law to operate correctly, last step, okay, well, shoot, I'm sorry, my taxes did not get filed on time this week. I will stand on them until you decide to operate legally. And I'll bet you they start to straighten up and fly right. Because if they won't do it, why would you pay them 1 penny? 1 cent. I'd target something that hits the governor's office as hard as you could. I wouldn't do it across the board. I'd say that we're not giving you. And stop it dead in its tracks until that governor steps down. He is there as a freeloader. He does not deserve to be in that office at this point, even before his term ends, because he's participated in a bank robbery and he the hell knows it.
Yeah.
Good.
So Juan, the narrative is that we are the little guy, that we're constantly losing, but the truth is we're constantly winning over and over and over. And I don't know if you knew these numbers, but the highest number of write-in votes in history was for Strom Thurmond in 1954. It had 139,000. The second highest was Lisa Murkowski with 100,000. I'm sitting at 113,000 right now in Utah, and that's still with about 20% of the votes still to be counted. So we'll see where this ends up, but that's got to send a strong message to whoever's paying attention, if there is anybody paying attention, that there are a lot of people in Utah that are saying very proactively, 113,000 so far that are saying, even though his name is not even on the ballot, we do not want Spencer Cox. We want Phil Lyman, and that's got to speak for something.
Well, and I think that, again, it wasn't a fair race at any level. Look, it did not qualify. If I go out on the racetrack and the spoiler on my vehicle is a 1/4 inch too high, I'm disqualified. If I have a little more gas and I'm in a NASCAR race, some of the guys got sneaky, they put extra oversized gas lines on their cars, and they were able to get almost a gallon of extra gas, where the laps are all, so you have to get fuel, and you have a certain amount of fuel you can carry at a time. And these guys were cheating. They get smart. They make the tires go out just a little bit wider so they can handle better with spacers on the wheels. They would stretch the rules just enough. And the other guys, crap, I don't know why I'm not winning. I don't know why I can't make this work. Well, because they're cheating, and they got 1,000 ways to cheat. The East Coast boys would cheat against us West Coast kids so hard that it was just, and we just couldn't find all the cheats. And then when I came in 79 and 80, and we just went through and we said, we're going to know this rule book so good that if we see anything that's not right, we're screaming bloody murder. They couldn't win a race. Richard Petty came out, and we cleaned their clock every time because we caught all the little things. Oh, that's a mistake. Oh, we didn't realize. Oh, maybe the West Coast rules are a little different. We all do this on the East Coast. Bullshit. Y'all cheat.
Yeah, and why?
Okay.
Just to say, that's what happened with Phil. That's exactly why Phil ran and did what he did, is because we needed to see how they were cheating, because we could never get anybody through. We could never get our candidate up there because they were cheating, and it's revealed so much.
Well, remember, that's why
Oh,
Dang it.
I know.
We're that close.
I guess the
hearing the
message
secret.
is that Cox is somehow using a spoiler, right?
Or an extra gas tank.
And he'll-
I mean,
he'll
no,
leave-
I think
he'll
he
leave it.
probably is full of gas, but
And a
you know,
cheater.
Yeah, big
yeah.
cheater.
So, the only thing I could think of was that I had an uncle that was the all-time winningest Harley Davidson motorcycle racer on the East Coast, and he did not cheat. He ended up dying in his last race, which was the way he wanted to go. But that's all I could think of was how upset he would be for somebody cheating even on a race. And it's interesting. We'll get upset about people cheating on a race. We'll get upset about our microwaves, but we won't get upset about our basic freedoms being stolen and cheated away from us. And Juan's exactly right. Cox is not, he's the front guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he loves being the front guy because he probably loves the attention and he loves the power that goes with it. But who's he having to surrender that power to? Who's pulling the strings behind him? Who's worked so hard to make sure that this is constantly going on? And that ought to be something that at least 117,000 Utahns ought to be really upset about at this point in time. That somebody they do not even know is pulling the strings to manipulate their lives for this figurehead that doesn't even have the courage to do it right. Because, we've talked about the fact that I'm not big on being second, but I would never want to be first if the only way I could be first was to cheat and not actually be first. That's where me and my personality, I would say, what do I need to improve me so I can legitimately be first? Because there's nothing quite like being first. If the only way you are first is to cheat, I can't imagine. I really don't know what that feels like, but I can't imagine it's a good feeling. And when you see, athletes cheat, let's take the classic example from the Olympics. The man who beat up on the woman boxer. If that's cheating, and he could not possibly be proud of that. I mean, Cox is equivalent to the man who pretended to be a woman and then went up and beat a woman in the head with a single blow, and everything that she'd worked for in her life, she gave up. I'm not saying you're a woman. I'm just saying, in the analogy of this is the disgusting behavior that Cox is exhibiting, and we have seen it permeate our society because people will not stand up and object to it. And even the Olympic Committee went along with this nonsense, which degrades the value of the Olympics. This is degrading the value of the governorship of Utah. It is degrading the value of Utah. And I've been to Utah. There are very good people in Utah. There are.
You know, I was just doing a little research on what the church has to say about cheating, and I found out that the LDS Church has a pamphlet which is titled "For the Strength of the Youth," and it outlines standards for young members, advises against dishonest behavior like cheating in school. It encourages young people to develop integrity, hard work, and rely on their own abilities. Maybe those listening could all send a copy of that to Governor Cox,
Yeah.
because obviously he missed it when
Yep.
he was growing up.
I've got a good friend that just a plug for Cody Robbins. He's a new country singer, and he was doing a show for us. And one of the lyrics in one of his songs says, "I'd rather be a honest beggar than a thief." And that's really what we're talking about here. And people are saying, I'd rather. They crossed that threshold to where they have no moral backstop. They've decided they would rather be a thief than an honest anything. And someone the other day said, there's no way that Cox feels good about this win. And I said, oh, bank robbers feel ecstatic after they rob a bank. He feels like he's gotten away with it. He's going to get away with it again. That is the thrill of being a dishonest, a thief, honestly, is what it comes down to. And it's a different mentality, and the good people never quite process that those on the other side who have given up any moral backstop to their behavior don't think the way that the rest of us think.
Yeah, every dictator in history always thought they were right. Hitler didn't think he was doing anything wrong. Genghis Khan didn't think he was doing anything wrong. Bad people in our country who've done things never think they are wrong. It's a rule of acting. You learn if you want to play the part of the bad guy. You can't do it if you think that's the bad guy. You can only do it if you think that's the good guy. Then you get an understanding of that. Yeah. And if you are an attorney and you are hearing my voice right now, you have an ethical obligation to notify the Utah board that under Rule 8.4, the Professional Code of Conduct of Attorneys, ABA Rule 8.4, you have the ethical obligation to at least notify the Utah Bar Association of potentially unprofessional, unethical behavior on the part of another attorney whose last name is Cox, serving as the governor of Utah. And if you don't, another attorney who knows that you did not do that has the right to file against you and putting your bar license on the line for not having simply done your professional conduct requirement as an ABA member, of which, sadly, I'm also a member of that organization also.
Wow. That is that was awesome. It's a really good way to wrap up. So, Tracy, Phil, I know that you're not backing down. And I know that the people of Utah who feel like the election was stolen because we voted back at the state convention, they don't want you to back down. So what can you tell the citizens of Utah who voted for you? They trusted you. You got their votes at that state convention at 67.54.
Yep.
What do you want to tell the citizens of Utah?
Well, number one, I guess, we're not weak. We're strong. I would much rather be weak than be strong and pretend like I'm a weakling. We're not going to pretend like we're a weakling in this fight. And I've told my people, I don't have the luxury of surrendering on this because it's not my fight. It is their fight. It's all of our fight. And we've won. We keep winning over and over and over, and still having it stolen from us by disingenuous, dishonest thieves, and it's killing me. The big silver lining on all of this, besides uncovering all of it, is having programs exactly like this, where someone from outside the state looks in and says, this is ridiculous. This is not how things are going to work. So I've said it before on this program, but I'll say it again. To have Juan weigh in on this, to have Dr. Fleming weigh in on this, Lori and Jim, for you guys to be able to do this. I mean, it is a blessing, and I don't count it as anything other than a straight blessing from God that we have a voice, and by dang, we're not going to be quiet simply because the people on the other side are fighting us. And, Tracy's got more integrity in her little finger than most of these attorneys that she's up against, and more intellectual capacity than most of them. And so between all of the people that are in this and having, someone honest like Tracy who's working on this, it's not that we, can't ever win. It's that we can't lose, when we're not going to lose on this.
Tracy, can you hold your little finger up? Can you put that up? I think you're right. I mean, it does. It does look like there's more integrity there than many of the attorneys, and certainly more than integrity than I've seen in Mr. Cox's photos and his efforts to manipulate people of the state. So, wow, imagine she's got two of those. That is it's probably embarrassing to Mr. Cox to deal with the fact that he has people in the state of Utah who have a conscience, who knows what's right and what's wrong, and are calling him out on it. And I would think sheer embarrassment if he has an ounce of integrity. Again, let's see the finger, Lori. Or I'm sorry, not Lori, but Tracy. Yeah, so if he even has maybe just that distal part of it, the last third of it, that much integrity, he would want to personally call forward and recognize that an election needs to be reheld. But he's hoping that the people listening to this program, the people in Utah, will not stand up for what's right. He's hoping the Supreme Court won't take the case. He's hoping he can misdirect people again, that you will not look at the man behind the curtain. But Utah is not Oz, and there's not a balloon waiting to take you out of Utah. You're there for the long run. I think the message for the people in Utah is that you recognize that over 100,000 have your back, and you want them to know you have their back. And it's time for the people of Utah who are supporting each other to stand up and right the sail of the ship of Utah so it can get afloat again instead of floundering in the sand dunes.
And I'm not giving up. I don't believe in our elections being stolen from us. It's wrong. And I know Utah. I know my ancestors. I know the people of Utah, and they will stand up, and they're going to get very angry that this has been stolen from them and that they've been tricked and confused. Some of them don't even know that it's going on because our media is stolen too. So we're going to have a website named poisonedpower.com, and we'll have Utah's Antidote. And I'm going to have a list because I know a lot of people don't know what to do or how to do it. So we'll keep you updates on the Supreme Court. I'm going to have more lawsuits, and so is Phil, because there are members of the legislature that knew this. They knew it was happening, and they didn't do anything to stop it. They knew it was wrong. The sponsors of the bill knew. They stood on the committee floor and swore testimony that they were saving the convention, and that if you reached over 60%, you went directly to a primary. So there are people that I am going to make sure they are held accountable. So thank you guys for having this.
So we'll look forward to the SCOTUS update when that time is right. But Phil, thank you. Tracy, thank you. Dr. Fleming, thank you. Jim, thank you. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend. We had a lot of viewers. For those of you who are looking for any information of what we talked about on this podcast, you can send us an email at info@thewellnesscrusaders.com, and we will get you in touch with the right person and also get you in touch with any of the documents that we had on the screen.
Hey,
So,
Lori,
yes.
before you go, you could also send it to info@poisonpower.com.
Yes, yes. That's probably a better one for these podcasts going forward. info@poisonedpower.com. And we've got a group of us that will be checking those emails. And for those of you who want to share this, it is recorded. So please share it with as many people as you possibly can. And listen, if your Freedom microwave is broken, it's time to stand up because we can't do it without you. So be strong, Utah, and thank you all.
God bless.
I guess you're either calling for an antidote or an enema. Is that right?
It's an antidote, Utah's antidote.
Well, let's hope the antidote works before you need an enema.
Very true.
Well, go Trump. We'll see what happens there along
Yes.
those lines. Yeah.
There we
Right.
go. Good night for now.
Good night.
Love you guys.